The small patch on her neck felt like a brand, a circle of cool plastic hiding the secret that would get her killed. Truth be told, she was a walking contradiction, a wolf who was not whole, a lamb raised in a den of predators. Because of that, her life in the Silver Crescent Pack was a masterpiece of invisibility, a quiet performance she perfected with every passing day. She moved through the pristine, cold halls of the pack house like a whisper, her shoulders hunched and her eyes always down. With every heartbeat, she felt the oppressive weight of their perfection, their pure-blood arrogance of physical force that threatened to crush her. They were beautiful and they were cruel. Her only hope was the upcoming mating ceremony. It was a gilded promise of safety, a union with the alpha heir, Marcus Thorne, that she believed would finally make her real, finally make her worthy. Just a few more days. Moments later, she saw him. Marcus was on the training grounds, a blur of controlled violence and effortless power, and her breath caught. He was everything she wasn't. Confident, revered, undeniably whole. Maybe it was fate that he was her intended, the one wolf who could shield her from the pack's brutal judgment. He finished his sparring match, his opponent bowing in submission, and his eyes scanned the grounds, landing on her for a fraction of a second. He gave a short, possessive nod. It wasn't warm, it wasn't loving. But it was an acknowledgement, an ownership. And for her, that was enough. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling of being an imposter in a story that was never meant for her. What would you do if your only chance at survival was to tie yourself to a man who represented everything you feared? In that moment, a shadow fell over her. It was Marcus's father, the current alpha. His face a mask of cold authority. He didn't speak. He just looked at her, his gaze sharp and assessing, lingering for a moment that stretched into a moment. Eternity. It was a look that said, "I see you." Not the quiet, obedient girl, but the secret she was hiding beneath her skin. A chill that had nothing to do with the morning air crawled down her spine. Before she could move, he was gone, turning his attention back to his son. But the feeling of his stare remained, a cold weight in her stomach. No matter how hard she tried, she couldn't dismiss it. She fled the training grounds, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. She needed a distraction, something to quiet the roaring in her ears. So she went to the pack's digital archives, a place of silent histories and forgotten laws, under the pretense of studying the lineage of the Thorne family for the ceremony. Her fingers trembled as she typed, her search drifting from public records to more obscure files. That's why she found it. A file titled Blood Trait Anomalies, most of it redacted, locked behind levels of clearance she couldn't dream of. But one line was visible, a sub, seemingly left by mistake, Hunter's nullification. The words meant nothing to her, and yet they meant everything. A jolt went through her, a strange primal recognition that she couldn't explain. Her body moved on instinct, her hand slamming the tablet shut as if it had burned her. Deep down, she knew the truth. That look from the Alpha, this hidden file. They were connected, and they were about her. As if summoned by her fear, the library door opened. It was Marcus. His smile was a perfect, polished thing, but it didn't touch the coldness in his eyes. "Getting sentimental?" he asked, his voice smooth as silk, reading up on our family's glorious history. The space between them burned with unspoken questions, and she knew with a certainty that terrified her, that her perfect, gilded promise was already beginning to crack. The highway was a lonely god, and Jax was its only worshipper. The engine of his motorcycle was a low growl beneath him, a constant companion in a world that everything else. He was a ghost, a rogue alpha with no pack, a king with no kingdom, and his only purpose was a cold, burning vengeance that tasted like ash in his mouth. He hated the great packs. He hated their sterile manners, their arrogant laws, and their obsession with pure bloodlines. Because their peace was built on the ashes of his own. Because of that, he trusted no one and nothing except the weight of the weapon at his back and the roar of the engine that could carry him away from the ghosts that chased him. That night, he stopped at a gas station that smelled of stale coffee and gasoline, the flickering neon sign painting his worn leather jacket in shades of red. He pulled out a burner phone. Its screen cracked and checked the encrypted message from one of his few scattered informants. It was intel. The Silver Crescent Pack, the dogs who had helped lead the charge against his family, was holding a mating ceremony for the alpha heir. The message contained a name, S. It was flagged with a low-level anomaly marker, human-blooded. He felt a familiar sneer twist his lips. Another half-breed to be paraded around as a symbol of tolerance before being locked away. So he dismissed it. It wasn't his problem. Still, the name stuck with him, Serafina. Soon after, he made camp deep in the woods that bordered their territory. The scent of pine a welcome change from the endless asphalt. Despite that, the woods offered no peace, only memories. He built a small fire, the flames dancing and spitting in the dark. But then the fire shifted, its light catching on the chrome of his bike. And without warning, the memory hit him. A flash of his mother's smile, warm and bright. Her voice telling a younger, happier version of himself a story. "Our pack is different, Jax," she had said, her hand stroking his hair. "The Sunstone Pack knows true strength isn't in purity. It's in unity in every kind of blood." A beat later, the memory soured. The smell of pine turning. Smell of smoke. The sound of her laughter replaced by screams. His father's roar of defiance cut short. As if pulled by a string, his hand went to the faded sigil tattooed on his wrist, the eclipsed sun of his lost pack. The fire in front of him wasn't just a fire. It was an echo of the inferno that had consumed his world. A blaze set by the very wolves he now watched from the shadows. To make things worse, their continued existence was an insult to his family's memory. How could they thrive while his own pack was nothing but whispers and ghosts? In the quiet that followed, he let the cold rage settle deep in his bones. It was a familiar feeling, a blanket he had wrapped himself in for 10 long years. He looked through the trees at the distant, arrogant lights of the Silver Crescent Packhouse, a place of order built on murder and lies. The ceremony would be soon. His original plan was just to watch, to gather more information on their defenses, their leadership. More important, he needed to find a weakness, a crack in their perfect facade. But the memory of his mother's voice changed things. It made this personal. It always was. But now the wound felt fresh, raw. He thought of the girl, Serafina, the human-blooded anomaly. A piece on a chessboard he hadn't intended to play. But maybe she was the crack he was looking for. Before the words left his lips, a low growl rumbled in his chest. A promise spoken to the ghosts in the fire and the wind. In the echo of his voice, the vow was made. For you, mother, for you, father. He would watch their little ceremony, and if he saw an opportunity, he would burn their perfect world to the ground. The air in the ceremonial clearing grew thick, heavy with the scent of pine and anticipation. Her heart skipped a beat when Marcus stepped forward, his face a handsome, unreadable mask. This was it, the moment that would define the rest of her life. He was supposed to take her hand, to speak the words of the Ansi, bonding right, and finally make her safe. Instead, he stopped a few feet away, his eyes sweeping over her, not with love, but with a cold, clinical disgust that made her blood run cold. His voice, when it came, was not a lover's whisper. It was a pronouncement, a judgment delivered to the entire world. "I, Marcus Thorne, alpha heir of the Silver Crescent Pack," he began, his voice ringing with false authority. The silence stretched, a taut string about to snap, and then it did. "Do hereby reject you, Serafina." The words were a physical blow, a punch to the gut that stole her breath. Her thoughts spun into a chaotic whirl. No, this is a mistake, a joke. But then he continued, twisting the knife. Your blood is weak, unworthy. You are tainted by the scent of a human. Human. He said the word like it was filth. And just like that, everything changed. As if the shock of his words had broken a dam inside her. The delicate scent blocker patch on her neck failed. Her own scent. The one she had hidden her entire life. The one that smelled of both wolf and woman, of forest and hearth, flooded the clearing. A wave of gasps rippled through the assembled pack. They could smell it. They could all smell her lie. Her world tilted on its axis, horror washing over her in a freezing wave. Her goal of a safe future shattered, replaced by a single primal need to run. To disappear before the pack warriors, their faces twisting from confusion to predatory rage. Could act on their alpha heir's command. Before she could move, their predatory gazes locked onto her. She didn't know what scared her more, the hatred in their eyes or the triumphant smirk on Marcus's face. But then a new sound tore through the clearing. It wasn't a wolf's howl. It was something else entirely. Something loud and angry and made of metal and thunder. A sound of pure, unadulterated rebellion. The motorcycle, a monster of black chrome and roaring fury, skidded to a halt just feet from the serum. Stone, churning up dirt and scattering pebbles. The pack froze, their bloodlust momentarily forgotten, replaced by stunned confusion. The man who swung his leg off the bike was unlike any wolf she had ever seen. He wore worn leather like a second skin, and he moved with a live, dangerous grace that was all predator. He was a rogue, an outcast, and he was walking right towards them. He completely ignored her at first, his eyes, chips of cold, hard obsidian, locking onto Marcus. His lip curled in a sneer. Bad move, pup, he said, his voice a low, rumbling growl that vibrated through the ground. And then his gaze found hers, her breath caught. It wasn't the cold disgust of her pack or the possessive pride she'd once hoped for from Marcus. No, this was different. It was a look of raw, hungry focus, of an intensity that saw straight through her fear to the trembling core of her. In that moment, the world narrowed to the space between them. The tension broke when he spoke again. His voice ringing with a power that defied the pack alpha himself. The ladies with me. Silence. Utter shocked silence. Who was this man? What did he mean? She was with him. She was a pariah, a half-breed reject, marked for death, not a prize to be claimed. He was insane. He was going to get them both killed. Her mind screamed at her to run, to apologize, to beg her pack for a mercy they would never grant. Her body, however, remained frozen, trapped under the weight of his stare. As if fate demanded it, he took a step closer away from Marcus and toward her. He held out a callous, gloved hand. It was an offer, an escape, an impossibility. Your choice, he said, his voice dropping lower, meant only for her. Stay and die, or ride and live. And she was forced to wonder, was this a rescue, or was it just a different kind of cage? He watched it all from the treen, a ghost in the shadows. He'd seen the girl Seraphina standing there so full of fragile hope it almost made him sick. He knew this ceremony was a sham because the pure blood doctrine was a poison that rotted everything it touched. He was just there to observe, to find a weakness. He hadn't planned to intervene, not at all. But then the thorn pup opened his mouth and spoke the words human-blooded, and something inside Jax snapped. It was the same word they'd used for his mother, the same justification they'd whispered while their warriors put her home, her pack, her family to the torch. His carefully controlled rage, the cold companion of a decade, exploded into white, hot, silent fury. All his plans for stealth and observation evaporated. As a result, His body moved on instinct. He kick-started the bike, the engine roaring to life like the beast in his chest. He wasn't just a ghost seeking vengeance anymore. He was an alpha. And that boy had just threatened someone who should have been under his protection. That's why he crashed their perfect little party. That's why he relished the fear on their faces. He strode forward, the scent of her, that unique, intoxicating mix of wolf and human, calling to something ancient inside him. He'd seen her file, knew she was an anomaly. But seeing her in person, seeing the fire she tried to hide behind her fear. She wasn't just an anomaly. She was a legacy. She was a survivor. She was his. The claim left his lips before he even thought it through. The lady's with me. It was a gambit, a reckless move that put a target on both their backs. But as he looked at her, truly looked at her, he knew it was the only move he could have made. He saw the terror in her wide eyes, but he also saw the flicker of fight. He held out his hand, an offer that was really a demand. Stay and die, or ride and live. He wa. Her. He needed to know if she had the strength to take the first step, because if she did, he could handle the rest. Her thoughts spun a whirlwind of fear and indecision. Stay and face the cold judgment of her pack. A trial that would end in a swift, brutal execution. Or go with this stranger, this violent, unpredictable rogue who looked at her like he owned her soul. He represented chaos, the unknown, a life on the run that she couldn't possibly imagine. Yet, he also represented a chance, a single terrifying chance to live. Without thinking, her hand moved, lifting from her side as if pulled by a string. Her fingers brushed against his glove. A jolt like lightning shot up her arm. It was real. This was real. He was real. Her world tilted and she made her choice. She put her hand in his. Without another word, his grip tightened, warm and impossibly strong. He pulled her forward past a stunned Marcus and swung her onto the back of the motorcycle. "Hold on," he commanded. His voice a low growl in her ear. She wrapped her arms around his waist, pressing her face against the cool, worn leather of his jacket. It smelled of gasoline and wind and something else. Something wild and uniquely him. The engine screamed, a defiant howl that drowned out the enraged shouts of her former pack. They launched forward a blur of speed and sound, leaving the clearing, the pack, and her entire life behind in a cloud of dust. The wind was a physical force, whipping her hair and stealing the tears from her eyes before they could fall. Her breath caught in her throat, a sob of terror and relief all at once. She was free and she was hunted, and the only thing keeping her anchored to this new terrifying reality was the steady, solid presence of the stranger whose arms she clung to. A man whose name she didn't even know. The moment her fingers touched his, he felt it. A jolt of connection so powerful it almost staggered him. She chose to ride. She chose to live. A fierce, possessive satisfaction surged through him. He pulled her onto the bike, her body fitting against his back as if she were made for it. Her arms wrapped around him, a fragile grip that he could feel trembling through his leather jacket. And she let it happen. She trusted him, the fool. With a final contemptuous glance at the chaos he had created, he opened the throttle. The bike leaped forward, and they were gone. He drove like a demon, pushing the machine to its limit, putting as much distance as possible between them and the silver crescent. Each mile was a small victory. But with each mile, the fiery adrenaline of the confrontation began to cool, replaced by the cold, hard reality of what he had just done. Truth be told, he had shattered a decade of careful planning. He was no longer a ghost moving through the cracks. He was a declared enemy of one of the most powerful packs in the region, and he had tied this burl, this complete stranger, to his fate. Because of T, his mission was now infinitely more complicated. He wasn't just fighting for the memory of the dead anymore. Now he had to fight for the life of the living. He felt her grip tighten as they took a sharp turn, her body pressing closer. Her scent, now unobscured by any blockers, filled his senses. It was a dangerous, distracting scent that made the wolf inside him stir with a possessiveness he hadn't felt in years. He had claimed her in a moment of righteous fury, and just like that, everything changed. Now he had to figure out how to keep them both alive. The open road stretched out before them, a dark ribbon of promise and peril. The real fight, he knew, had only just begun. The engine finally died, and the sudden silence was deafening. Her world, which had been a blur of screaming wind and roaring thunder, came to a dead stop. In the echo of the engine's last gasp, all she could hear was the frantic thumping of her own heart. He slid off the bike, his movements fluid and Sue. The pre-dawn gloom. She, on the other hand, felt boneless, her arms and legs trembling with leftover adrenaline and a deep bone-aching exhaustion. He chose this place, a run-down motel that looked like it had been forgotten by time itself, because it was the kind of place no one would ever look for someone important. And she was no longer important. She was prey. He paid for a room with cash, his face hidden by the shadows of the night, and led her to a door with appealing number 7. The room inside smelled of stale cigarettes and bleach. It was dingy, it was grim, and it was the safest place she had been in her entire life. She sank onto the edge of a lumpy bed, the worn-out springs groaning in protest. He ignored her, moving around the small space with a restless energy, checking the flimsy lock on the door, peering through the dirty blinds. He was a creature of the shadows, a man perfectly at home in the dark places of the world. Who was he? What followed was a tense, heavy silence broken only by the sound of his movements. Eventually, he seemed satisfied. He turned, and in the dim light from the parking lot, she saw his face clearly for the first time. He was handsome in a rugged, scarred sort of way. But his eyes, they were ancient, filled with a grief so profound it made her own chest ache with sympathy. He tossed a cheap plastic-wrapped phone onto the bed next to her, followed by a crumpled wad of cash. "New life, new number," he said, his voice a low, growly thing that sent shivers down her spine. "Don't use your real name. Don't talk to anyone, you don't have to. Stay off their radar." She stared at the items, the flimsy tools of who knew broken life. 100 questions swirled in her mind, but only one made it past her lips. Her voice a trembling whisper. "Why did you help me?" He stopped his pacing and finally looked at her, his gaze so intense it felt like a physical touch. The space between them burned with everything they were saying. "For now," he said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. "Let's just say I don't like seeing bullies pick on people who can't fight back. Now get some sleep. We leave at sunrise." Without another word, he settled into the room's single grimy armchair, leaving her with the bed and 1,000 unanswered questions. He watched her from the chair, a ghost in the corner of the dingy room. She had finally fallen into a restless sleep, her face pale and tear-streaked in the faint light. He should have left her. He knew it. He should have dropped her at a bus station, 100 miles away, with a pocket full of cash, and disappeared back into his own lonely war. It would have been smarter. It would have been safer. But he hadn't. That's why he was now sitting here, watching over a half-human girl who was a walking, talking liability. He felt a surge of frustration, not at her, but at himself. He had let his rage, his past, dictate his actions, and now he was responsible for her. Her life was in his hands. He ran a hand over his face, the rough scruff on his jaw scraping his palm. What was he thinking? This girl was soft. She was raised in the heart of the enemy, a pampered princess who wouldn't last a day on the run. At least that's what he told himself. Deep down, he knew the truth. He didn't save her just because he hated Marcus Thorne. He saved her because when he looked at her standing there, facing down her entire pack, he hadn't seen a victim. He'd seen a fighter. He'd seen the same defiant spark that had lived in his mother's eyes, and he couldn't let them extinguish it. With a low growl of frustration, he stood up and began his ritual, cleaning his weapon, checking his gear, planning their next move. He had to keep her alive, and more importantly, he had to keep his distance. He couldn't afford another connection. He couldn't afford another weakness. The ghosts of his past were company enough. When she woke up and asked him why he'd helped, he gave her the simplest, coldest answer he could think of. It was a lie, of course, a half-truth at best, but it was easier than admitting the real reason. That in her he saw a flicker of the home he had lost, and he would be damned if he let them destroy that too. The next few days were a blur of cheap coffee, endless highways, and the constant humming tension of being on the run. Jax, her reluctant savior, taught her the rules of their new life. It was a strange, grim education. At a dusty roadside stop, he made her buy a box of cheap hair dye. "Your hair is too noticeable," he'd said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "We need you to be forgettable." So, in the grimy bathroom of a gas station, she washed away the last traces of the old Serafina, her silvery blonde hair turning a mousy, anonymous brown. She felt like a ghost shedding her skin, and it was both terrifying and liberating. Her entire life, she'd been taught that her worth was in her lineage, her appearance, her purity. Now, her survival depended on having none of those things. To make things worse, their cash was running low. That night they stopped at a lonely diner, the kind of place where the waitresses were friendly and the questions came easy. This was her first real test. Could she be the forgettable girl? The waitress, a kind-faced woman named Flo, came over, her smile warm. "What can I get for you two lovebirds?" she asked, her eyes twinkling. Serafina's heart skipped a beat. She opened her mouth to deny it, to stammer an explanation. But then she remembered Jax's lessons. Be boring, be simple, be invisible. So she gave a small, shy smile. "Just coffee for me, please," she said, her voice quiet. Long day on the road. She was good at this. Maybe a little too good. After all, her whole life had been training for it. She had spent years perfecting the art of being overlooked, of making herself small enough to not be a threat. Who knew that her greatest shame would become useful survival skill? Flo eventually moved on, her curiosity satisfied, and Serafina let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. Across the booth, Jax gave a single, almost imperceptible nod of approval. The small gesture sent a strange, warm flutter through her chest. It was the first time anyone had looked at her with anything resembling respect. "You're a natural at being invisible," he observed, his voice a low rumble. Then his gaze sharpened, pinning her to the vinyl seat. "Why?" The question was quiet, but it landed with the force of a physical blow. It was too personal, too close to the bone. Before the words left her lips, she looked away, her face burning. She couldn't tell him the truth. She couldn't tell him that she wasn't just hiding from the pack that was hunting her now. She had been hiding her entire life. He watched her in the diner, a flicker of grudging respect cutting through his frustration. She was smart. She played the part of the meek, tired traveler perfectly, her quietness a shield that deflected the waitress's friendly questions. He had expected tears, panic, a complete breakdown. Instead, she was adapting, using the very skills that her old life had forced upon her to survive in this new one. It was impressive, and it was dangerous. Because the more competent she became, the more he saw her as a person, and the harder it was to maintain the distance he so desperately needed. His question, why, had been a mistake. He saw it the moment he asked. He saw her flinch, saw the walls go up in her eyes, and he knew he had touched a nerve. He had touched the very wound that made her who she was. He didn't push it. He just paid for the coffee and led them back out into the night. A few hours later, The fuel gauge on the bike was hovering near empty. He had no choice but to stop at a brightly lit 24-hour service station just off the interstate. It was a risk. It was too public, too exposed, but they were out of options. As he filled the tank, his senses were on high alert, scanning every car, every shadow. And then he saw it, a dark sedan parked across the lot. No lights on, but he could smell them. The clean, sharp scent of pack warriors. Silver Crescent. His blood ran cold. He had been so focused on her, on their dwindling cash, that he had gotten careless. And now they were walking right into a trap. Without a word, his body moved on instinct. He grabbed her arm, his grip hard, and pulled her from the weak pool of light cast by the station's sign. "What?" she started to ask, but he clamped a hand over her mouth, dragging her back into the deep shadows between the station and a neighboring building. He pressed her against the cold brick wall, his body shielding hers, his senses screaming. The sedan's doors opened. 2 large figures emerged, their movements smooth and predatory as they began to sweep the area. His heart hammered against his ribs, not with fear for himself, but for her, for the silent woman pressed against him. The air thickened, charged with a danger so potent he could taste it. He held her there, a human shield, a desperate protector, the scent of her fear and her life startlingly real in his arms. And he was forced to wonder what scared him more, the wolves hunting them in the darkness, when the fierce primal need to protect her that was roaring to life inside him. A close call at the gas station left a bitter metallic taste of fear in her mouth. Her nerves were frayed, and the man beside her, Jax, was a storm cloud of silent, simmering rage. He drove them for hours after that, deep into the wild parts of the country she never knew existed, until they came to a place that wasn't on any map. It was a rogue encampment, a makeshift town of tents and trailers hidden in a deep wooded valley. The moment they arrived, she knew this was a different kind of danger. The air smelled of wood smoke, unwashed bodies, and spilled whiskey. Wolves were everywhere, men and women with hard eyes and scarred faces, their gazes lingering on her with open suspicion. Have you ever been judged by a room full of strangers? That's how she felt, but 100 times worse. These weren't the polished, cruel wolves of her old pack. These were the broken ones, the discarded ones, the ones who survived on scraps and fury. And she, with her soft hands and the faint lingering scent of the Silver Crescent world, was the enemy. Jax led her toward a central fire, his presence a shield she desperately hid behind. But it wasn't enough. A massive wolf, his face a roadmap of old fights, stepped into their path. His lip curled back from yellowed teeth. "What's this, Jax?" he snarled, his eyes raking over her with contempt. Bringing home a pure-blood pet. Jax went still. A dangerous, predatory stillness that made the air crackle. "She's with me, Silas," he said, his voice deceptively calm. "She smells like them," Silas shot back. "Like the ones who make the rules, the ones who cast us out." Deep down, she knew the truth. They hated her on sight because to them she was a symbol of the polished, orderly world that had chewed them up and spat them out. She saw Jax's shoulders tense, saw his hand drift toward the weapon at his back. He was going to fight for her. He was going to get himself killed for her. And in that moment, something inside her shifted. Without thinking, she stepped forward, her voice trembling but clear. "He's right," she said. Both Jax and Silas stared at her, stunned into silence. "I do smell like them," she continued, her heart pounding. "Because I lived with them. I followed their rules, and I bowed to their alpha. And for my loyalty, they declared my blood unworthy and sentenced me to death at my own mating ceremony." She laughed. Silas right in the eye. "So, you can hate me for where I came from, or you can see me for what I am, another outcast, just like you." The silence roared thick and heavy. Silas stared at her, his hostile gaze flickering with a new, grudging respect. He grunted, a sound deep in his chest, and then he stepped aside. As she moved past him, she felt Jax's hand brush against the small of her back, a fleeting touch of warmth and pride. He had brought her to the rogue camp because they were out of cash, out of options, and out of time. It was a calculated risk and a stupid one. The moment they arrived, he felt the weight of a dozen hostile stares on her, and a possessive rage, so fierce it shocked him, rose in his throat. He was ready to fight for her, to tear Silas apart for so much as looking at her wrong. He was ready to burn his last bridge with the rogue network to protect her. But then she spoke. He watched, stunned, as she faced down a brood who had alphas from 3 different tear. Backing down, she didn't use force. She didn't use threats. She used the one thing he never expected, the truth. She used her pain as a shield and as a weapon. Her voice trembled, yet her words were like steel. She was magnificent. When Silas stepped aside, Jax felt a surge of pride so powerful it almost knocked him off his feet. He had seen the flicker of fire in her, and now it was starting to burn. He had been so focused on her softness, he'd completely underestimated her strength. What followed was a tense period of bartering. Jax traded some spare motorcycle parts and a bit of information for food, water, and fuel. While he haggled, Serafina drifted over to a stall run by a twitchy magpie wolf who collected shiny things. Jax kept an eye on her, his instincts on high alert. He saw her freeze, her gaze fixed on a box of old tarnished junk. He reached in, her hand trembling, and pulled out a small silver locket. It was plain, old, and probably worthless. He didn't anything of it until he saw the look on her face. It was a look of pure, earth-shattering shock. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with disbelief. As if pulled by a string, he moved to her side. "What is it?" he asked, his voice low. She didn't answer. She just turned the locket over in her palm. And that's when he saw it. A tiny, barely visible symbol scratched into the back. An eclipsed sun. His breath caught in his throat. His blood ran cold. It was the sigil of his pack, the mark of the Sunstone Wolves, a symbol he hadn't seen since he was a boy, since the night of the fire. It wasn't possible. In the span of a breath, his carefully ordered mission, his entire understanding of his past collided with his chaotic present. It wasn't random. None of this was random. As if the world narrowed to that single impossible object, he heard her whisper his name. Jack. She looked up at him, her eyes filled with a million questions, her voice trembling as she asked the one that would see. Everything. This was my mother's. My mother? She was one of you? His face was a mask of stone, but she saw the shock in his eyes, the way his knuckles turned white as he stared at the locket in her hand. Her mother, a Sunstone Wolf, the legendary pack that had been wiped out for believing in unity between all bloodlines. The pack that Jax was the sole survivor of. It didn't make any sense. Her mother had been a quiet Omega in the Silver Crescent pack, a woman who lived in the shadows just like she did. It was a lie. Her whole life was a lie. The moment their eyes locked, something cracked between them. A wall of secrets and suspicion beginning to crumble. He finally spoke, his voice rough. "Tell me everything you know about her." And so she did. She told him about her quiet, sad mother who always seemed to be looking over her shoulder. She told him about her mother's sudden death from a wasting sickness years ago. A death that had always felt wrong. As the truth unraveled, a new terrible picture began to form. Her mother hadn't been a simple Omega. She had been a survivor in hiding, living in the heart of the enemy. And she had passed that legacy of fear and survival down to her daughter. No matter how hard she tried, Serafina couldn't reconcile the two images of her mother. Was she a victim, or was she a warrior? Jax listened, his expression growing grimmer with every word. When she was finished, he was silent for a long time. The tension broke when he finally looked at her, a new dangerous light in his eyes. "We can't keep running," he said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement. "Running gets us answers one piece at a time. It's too slow and it's going to get us killed." "What are you saying?" she whispered, her pulse racing. "I'm saying," he said, his gaze intense, "that the hunted are about to become the hunters." Before either could speak again, he pulled out his burner phone, his fingers flying across the screen. He was tapping into his network, his web of outcasts and informants. "There's a Silver Crescent data outpost about 50 miles from here," he said, showing her a crude map. "Low security. A place they store old records, logistics, things they think no one cares about." He looked at her, and she felt it clear as day, a shift in their dynamic. He wasn't just her protector anymore. He was asking her to be his partner. "Your mother's file might be there," he continued. "The real reason for her death. The reason she was hiding, and maybe the reason they want you dead." He was offering her a chance at the truth. But it was a truth guarded by the very wolves who were hunting them. A truth that could get them both killed. He was offering her a choice, just as he had at the ceremony. But this time, it wasn't just about living or dying. It was about fighting back. And this time, she didn't hesitate. "When do we leave?" The data outpost was a black cube of a building humming with a low electricity. Under a moonless sky, it was a place meant to be forgotten, which made it the perfect hiding spot for secrets. He moved through the darkness like a wraith, a whisper of motion against the deeper shadows of the forest. He had to trust her for this to work, because he was a hammer, and this part of the job needed a scalpel. He was good at breaking things, fences, bones, spirits. But she was good at finding the cracks. He disabled the cameras with practiced ease, bypassed the electric fence with a set of clipped wires, and neutralized the single-board guard with a silent chokehold that was over before the man even knew it began. The silence that followed was heavy with anticipation. He gave her the signal, and he watched as she slipped past him, a small, determined shadow moving toward the service entrance. He stood guard, his senses stretched to their limit, listening to the night sounds of the forest. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig sent a jolt of adrenaline through. His entire life, he had relied on no one but himself. It was the first rule of survival in his world. Trust no one. Depend on no one. But he was breaking that rule now. He was putting both their lives in the hands of a girl he'd met less than a week ago. A girl who was currently trying to hack into a high-security server, owned by the very people who wanted to kill her. It was insane, and yet it felt right. He heard a soft click over the comms unit in his ear. "I'm in," she whispered, her voice a little breathless. A surge of pride so fierce and unexpected it almost buckled his knees, shot through him. She had done it. "Find it," he murmured back, his eyes scanning the darkness. "Find the truth, Serafina." He didn't care about the logistics files or the patrol routes anymore. That had been the old mission, the mission of a ghost seeking vengeance. To make things worse, his new mission had a face and a name and a pair of wide, courageous eyes that were currently staring down. The secrets of his past. With every heartbeat, he knew he was crossing a line, a point of no return. And he found that he didn't give a damn. The inside of the outpost was cold and sterile, smelling of dust and ozone. The only sound was the low, constant hum of the servers, each one a metal tombstone holding a secret. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic rhythm against the quiet hum. She wasn't the scared girl from the library anymore. Her fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach. But now it was mixed with something else, a burning righteous anger. They had lied about her mother. They had tried to kill her, and she was going to make them pay. She slid into a terminal chair, her fingers flying across the keyboard. Her old life of quiet academic research twisting into a new skill: espionage, sabotage. She navigated the firewalls with a speed that surprised even herself. It was like a part of her brain she never knew existed had suddenly woken up. She found it buried deep under layers of encryption that would have stopped a normal person cold. But she wasn't normal. And her mother, she was beginning to suspect, hadn't been either. The file was labeled simply Project Purity. The name itself sent a shiver down her spine. It was a massive file protected by a final nasty piece of code. As she worked to bypass it, a soft chime echoed in the silent room, a silent alarm. Her blood ran cold. "Jax," she whispered into her calms. They know I'm here. How long?" His voice came back calm and steady, a rock in her sea of panic. "To download the whole file. 5 minutes, maybe less." "Buy me 5 minutes," he said. And then she heard it through the comms. A muffled thump, a choked-off cry. He was fighting for her 5 minutes. With her pulse racing, she initiated the download. The progress bar on the screen was a thin blue line, crawling at a torturously slow pace. A minute passed, then 2. She heard shouting now, the sound. Brutal, desperate fight echoing faintly through the building. The download was at 50%. Suddenly, a loud bang echoed from the server room next door, followed by the smell of something sharp and acrid. Smoke began to curl under the door. An errant shot, a fire. Red lights began to flash, and a loud, blaring alarm replaced the silent one. The blue line hit 100%. "Got it," she yelled. The door to her room burst open, and it was Jax, his face grim, his knuckles bloody. "Time to go," he shouted, grabbing her arm and pulling her out into the smoke-filled hallway. The fight was fast and dirty, just the way he liked it. 2 guards taken by surprise. He moved with a brutal efficiency born from years of survival. A whirlwind of fists and fury. He bought her the time she needed, his body a living wall between her and the enemy. But then more came, and one of them got off a lucky shot with his weapon. It didn't hit him. Instead, it hit a server rack, and the whole world went to hell. The smoke was thick and black, stinging his eyes. The alarms were a deafening shriek. His only thought was her. He burst into the terminal room and found her there, her face illuminated by the flashing red lights, a look of fierce triumph on her face. She had the data. She had the goddamn truth. He grabbed her and pulled her through the chaos, shielding her body with his own as they ran through the burning, smoke-filled corridors. They barely made it out, diving through a service hatch just as the facility's fire suppression system sealed the entire building in a tomb of metal and flame. They ran. They ran through the forest, leaving the fire and the screams and the secrets behind them. They didn't stop until miles later, when they collapsed in the relative safety of an old abandoned barn. The smell of hay and damp earth, a welcome relief from the acrid smoke. They were alive, they had won, and they had started a war. As the silence stretched between them, the adrenaline began to fade, leaving a raw, aching vulnerability in its wake. He saw a small red mark on her arm where a stray ember had landed. Before he could think, he reached out, his thumb gently brushing over the burn. His touch, meant to be clinical, felt anything but. The air thickened, charged with a new kind of tension. Her skin was soft, warm, and so very real beneath his calloused thumb. What do you do when the only person you can trust is the most dangerous person you've ever met? He saw the look in her eyes. Gratitude, fear, and something else. Something that mirrored the fierce, possessive storm raging inside him. She leaned in, and she kissed him. It was a kiss of smoke and desperation, of shared terror and stunning victory. And it shattered every last one of his defenses. He kissed her back, a decade of loneliness and rage and grief pouring out of him. It was a raw, hungry kiss that sealed their fate more surely than ever could. It was everything he had told himself he couldn't have. It was a weakness, a liability. But in that moment, as her lips moved against his, it felt like the only thing that had ever been real. When he finally pulled away, he was trembling. "This," he choked out, his voice rough with an emotion he couldn't name. "This changes things, Serafina." And he knew with a certainty that chilled him to the bone that their enemies would now have a new way to hurt him. A better way through her. The kiss had left her breathless, her world tilted on its axis. But the look in his eyes afterward, the raw fear that replaced the passion, was a cold dose of reality. They were still hunted. They were still in danger. In the quiet that followed, they huddled together in the dusty hoft of the abandoned barn. The data stick clutched in her hand like a holy relic. It held the truth about her mother. It held the reason for everything. Jax rigged up a battered old laptop to a portable power so his movements tense and efficient. The moment he plugged in the stick, the screen lit up, and she held her breath. The decryption was surprisingly fast. And the file opened. Project Purity. It was worse than she ever could have imagined. It wasn't just a file. It was a ghost story written in clinical, horrifying detail. It was a systematic eugenics program designed by the Silver Crescent leadership to identify and neutralize wolves with what they called unstable genetic traits. Traits like overwhelming strength, psychic abilities, or the power to nullify, the nullifier gene. Her mother's name was there, listed as a subject who had escaped the program years ago. She wasn't just hiding from the pack. She was hiding from a private, monstrous science experiment. And then Serafina saw the final entry, a subfile on the locket. It was a tracking device, a sophisticated subdermal chip powered by body heat, designed to activate once it was separated from the original host for an extendee. The locket wasn't a memory. It was a trap. Her mother had left her a homing beacon that led her enemies right to her. Before the words left her lips, a low growl rumbled from Jax's chest. Her head snapped up, and she heard it. The distant sound of engines growing closer, much closer. "They're here," he whispered, his voice a blade of ice. The locket felt like a hot coal in her hand, a symbol of love that had been twisted into the ultimate betrayal. What happens when the one thing you thought was a connection to your past turns out to be the very thing that destroys your future? As if summoned, bright headlights flooded the barn, pinning them in their dusty hiding spot like insects under glass. He saw the truth dawn on her face as she read the file, her expression crumbling from hope to horror. But he didn't have time to process the monstrous scope of Project Purity. His senses, honed by a decade on the run, screamed a warning. He heard the engines, smelled the scent. Of multiple wolves on the wind, Silver Crescent, they had played him. They had used the girl's love for her mother to lead them right into his hands. His own feelings for her, the distraction she represented, had made him sloppy. He had failed to see the trap until it had already sprung. Without warning, the barn doors exploded inward, torn from their hinges. Marcus Thorne stood there, flanked by a dozen of his elite guard, their eyes glowing with predatory light. They were armed with silver-laced blades, the metal's cold scent a poison in the air. "Nowhere left to run, rogue." Marcus sneered, his eyes filled with a triumphant hatred. Jax didn't answer. He just moved. He fought with the fury of a doomed man, because he was protecting the last piece of his soul. He was a whirlwind of motion, a desperate cornered animal. He broke a man's arm, shattered another's jaw, but they just kept coming. They were a tide of bodies and silver blades, and he was a single rock being worn down. Assault. He felt a searing pain as a blade sliced deep into his side, the silver stealing his strength, his wolf whimpering within him. He stumbled, falling to one knee. He could see Marcus raising his sword for the final blow, a cruel smile on his face. This was it. This was how it ended. But then he heard her voice, clear and steady, cutting through the chaos. "Stop." Everything froze. He looked up and saw her stepping out of the shadows of the Haft, her hands raised in surrender. "Let him go," she said, her gaze locked on Marcus. "And I'll go with you willingly." "No," he roared, trying to get to his feet, but his legs wouldn't obey. Marcus laughed, a sound devoid of any real humor. "You see?" he said, looking at Jax with utter contempt. "Her weakness saved you, and it damned her." As his guards grabbed her, she looked back at Jax one last time, her eyes filled with a sorrow so deep it cracked his heart in two. They dragged her from the barn, her feet barely touching the ground. She didn't fight. She couldn't. The fire that had burned in her since she'd met Jax was gone, extinguished by the cold, hard reality of her failure. Her one act of defiance, her one attempt to be strong and protect him, had led to this. It had led to her capture. It seemed her old belief was true after all. She was a curse. They didn't take her back to the main pack house. Instead, they took her to a separate facility, a sterile, windowless building that smelled of antiseptic and fear. It was the place from the files, the place where they had experimented on her mother. Her heart hammered against her ribs. A frantic, trapped bird. They threw her into a cell, the walls lined with the same polished, dull silver that had coated their blades. The heavy door slammed shut, the sound echoing the final closing of a tomb. A moment later, Marcus appeared on the other side of the bars. His face was no longer angry or triumphant. It was cold, curious. The look a scientist gives a particularly interesting insect. "You have your mother's eyes," he said, his voice conversational. "And her gift, the nullifier gene, so rare, so potent." He paced back and forth. "My father was a fool. He wanted to eradicate these traits, to purify the bloodlines." He shook his head. "I see things differently. Why destroy a weapon when you can control it, when you can replicate it?" He stopped and looked at her, and his smile was the most terrifying thing she had ever seen. "We're not going to kill you, Serafina. That would be a waste. We're going to study you. We're going to learn what makes you work. And then, we're going to use that knowledge to build an army of wolves who can turn their enemies into powerless, shivering humans with a single thought." Her blood ran cold. This was a fate worse than any death she could have imagined. To have her very essence, her one unique gift, twisted and perverted into a tool for tyranny, to become the source of their ultimate power. As the truth of her situation settled over her, a profound, bottomless despair washed away everything else. She had lost. She had lost Jax. She had lost her freedom. And now she had even lost herself. She slid down the cold silver wall, her body trembling as the darkness of the cell and her future swallowed her whole. He lay there for a long time, the scent of her fear, and the coppery tang of his own blood filling the wrecked barn. The pain in his side was a dull, throbbing fire, but it was nothing. Nothing compared to the gaping hollow wound in his soul. They had taken her. He had let them take her. The silence roared in his ears, filled with the ghosts of all his failures. The ghost of his mother, his father, his pack, and now the ghost of a brave half-human, who had looked at him with trust in her eyes. He had failed them all. He was a king of ashes, a prince of ghosts, destined only to watch the things he cared about burn. He finally managed to drag himself to his feet, his body screaming in protest. The barn was empty, a monument to his defeat. He saw the glint of something silver on the floor, the locket, the trap. He picked it up, the metal cool against his skin. He closed his fist around it, the edges digging into his palm. He had spent 10 years running, 10 years fueled by a cold, lonely vengeance. But that vengeance had never felt like this. This was different. This wasn't the cold ache of old grief. This was a living, breathing agony. This was a fire in his blood that demanded not just revenge, but reclamation. He stumbled out of the barn and into the night. His bike was still there, a loyal, waiting shadow. He didn't know where they had taken her. He didn't know how he would find her. He was wounded, alone, and facing the might of the Silver Crescent Pack. The odds were impossible. The fight was unwinnable, and he didn't give a damn. As he swung his leg over the bike, he looked up at the moon, a silent, indifferent witness to his pain. A vow, cold and hard as iron, formed in the ruins of his heart. He would not lose her. He would not let them break her. He would tear their world apart, stone by stone. He would burn their entire system to the ground. He would become the monster they always thought he was, and he would get her back or die trying. The despair in the cell was a living thing, a cold, heavy blanket that smothered all thought and hope. Her future was a nightmare, a sterile lab where her very soul would be dissected and weaponized. This was the end. She was a specimen, a curse, a failure. She leaned her head back against the cold, silver-lined wall, a tear tracking a path through the grime on her cheek. And then she felt it, a strange, low hum. It wasn't a sound. No, it was a feeling. A vibration that seemed to answer a part of her she never knew existed. The silver on the walls, designed to weaken a wolf, seemed to resonate with her. Have you ever been at rock bottom, only to find a strength you never knew you had? Curiosity, a tiny forgotten spark, flickered to life in the vast darkness of her despair. She pressed her palm flat against the wall. The hum grew stronger, a current of energy flowing not from the wall, but into her. She thought of the file nullifier. Maybe it wasn't just a switch to turn wolves off. Maybe it was more. She closed her eyes, and for the first time, she reached inward, not with fear, but with purpose. She focused on the energy pulling it, shaping it. A faint, silvery light bloomed from her hand, painting the dark cell in a soft, ethereal glow. She could do this because the power wasn't a curse. It was a part of her soul. As if fate demanded it, she heard the heavy tread of guards approaching her cell. Before, she would have cowed. Now she had a key. Her heart skipped a beat, and with a surge of newfound resolve, she pressed her glowing palm against the electronic lock on her door. The lock sparked violently, a flash of blue light, and then went dead. The door clicked open. In the stillness that followed, she slipped out of her cell, a ghost in a sterile maze. The corridors were empty, the guards likely assuming she was a broken, weeping mess. They were wrong. She was no longer a victim, no longer a specimen, no longer a curse. She was a weapon of her own making. She found what she was looking for, a security terminal, its screen glowing in the dim hallway. Her first thought was to find an exit, but then a better idea took root, an idea born of cold, hard fury. She could do more than escape. She could burn their entire secret world to the ground. Her fingers, no longer trembling, danced across the keyboard. She found the Project Purity file, the one she had bled to get, and bypassed its final encryption. And she opened a broadcast protocol, addressing it to every rogue network, every outcast channel Jax had ever mentioned. Her finger hovered over the enter key. This was it, the point of no return. She took a breath and pressed down. Immediately, alarms blared, a cacophony of shrieking sirens and flashing red lights that turned her quiet act of sabotage into a declaration of war. Guards were shouting, running. Chaos erupted, but Serafina didn't run for the exit. Instead, she turned and ran deeper into the facility, her goal clear in her mind. She knew Marcus. She knew his arrogance. He wouldn't flee. No, he would go to the one place where he could contain the damage, the lab's central power core, to initiate a system-wide data wipe and lockdown. As the truth unraveled, she realized her path was clear. She wasn't running from him anymore. She was running to him. She was going to confront the monster in his den. And this time, she wouldn't be the one in a cage. He dragged himself back to the rogue encampment, a walking ghost held together by sheer bloody-minded will. He was wounded, bleeding, and wryer of failure. The outcast saw him stumble into the firelight and smelled the scent of his defeat. They backed away, their faces a mixture of pity and contempt. He saw Silas, the brute who had challenged him before, and limped towards him. There was no time for pride. There was no time for anything but the raw, desperate truth. The Silver Crescent. They have her, Jax rasped, his voice raw. They have a secret lab, a project. They call it Project Purity. Silas scoffed. Not our fight, Jax. You played with a pure-blood pet and got burned. You think this is about her? Jax roared, a wave of fury giving him a sudden burst of strength. He grabbed Silas by the front of his shirt, his eyes blazing. This is about all of us. They're testing wolves. Silas, identifying what they call unstable traits, overwhelming strength. Unique gifts, things that different things that make us strong. They're not just hunting half-bloods. They're hunting anyone who doesn't fit their perfect little mold. Today it's her. Tomorrow it's you. Or you, he said, pointing to another scarred rogue. Or you? He let go of Silas, stumbling back. He was laying it all bare. His pain, his weakness, his desperate, insane plan. So you can sit here and die alone in the shadows, waiting for them to come for you. He panted, his voice dropping to a low, intense growl. Or you can fight with me. You can fight for a world where you're not considered a scrap to be thrown away. The rogues followed him because they saw in his eyes a fury that matched their own. His pain was their pain. His rage was their rage, as if the forest held its breath. Silas stared at him, the gears turning behind his hard eyes. Finally, he gave a slow, deliberate nod. "What's the plan, Alpha?" he asked. And the title this time was not a mockery. It was a promise. Moments later, as he was laying out a crude frontal assault strategy, his burner phone buzzed. It was a massive encrypted data burst from an unknown source. His heart stopped. He opened it and there it was. Everything. The Project Purity files unencrypted for the entire world to see. Proof. A name was attached to the broadcast source. Serafina. A wild, fierce laugh escaped his lips. A laugh of disbelief, of pride, of pure, unadulterated hope. She was alive, and she was fighting back. "Change of plans," he roared to the gathered rogues holding up the phone. "She's lit the fuse from the inside." He showed them the files, the cold, hard proof of the pure blood's treachery. "Now," he growled, a predatory smile spreading across his face for the first time in a decade. "We're the explosion." He led the charge himself, his wound a dull fire in his side, his heart a war drum in his chest. They were the broken, the discarded, the forgotten. And now they were an army. They hit the perimeter fence like a tidal wave of fury and desperation. He was no longer a lone wolf seeking vengeance for the dead. He was an alpha, a king, leading his people to reclaim the living. As the main gates buckled under their assault, he heard the alarms from inside. Her alarms. He threw his head back and howled, a sound of pure primal rage and a promise to the girl fighting on the other side of the wall. And then he charged through the breach. The door to the core chamber hissed open, and she stepped inside. The room was a cathedral of humming machinery, the air vibrating with raw power. Marcus was already there, his back to her, frantically working at a control panel. He was trying to erase it all, her mother's memory, his father's crimes, her very existence. He hadn't noticed her yet. Her voice, when she spoke, was not a whisper. It was a statement, calm and clear as a bell. "It's too late, Marcus." He spun around, his face a mask of disbelief that quickly curdled into pure rage. "You," he snarled. "You should be in a cell." "The locks were broken," she replied, taking another step into the room. He laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "It doesn't matter. You think you've won? I'll kill you. I'll kill that rogue dog you run with, and I will wipe this entire facility from history." As if to prove his point, his body began to change. His bones cracked and reformed. Fur sprouted across his skin, and with a guttural roar, he lunged at her, a massive, pure-blood wolf of muscle and fury. In the past, she would have screamed. She would have run. She would have died. But that was the old Serafina. Before she could even think, her body moved on instinct. She stood her ground, her heart calm, her breath steady. She raised her hand, palm out, not as a shield, but as a conduit. She didn't feel anger. She didn't feel fear. She felt peace. She felt the energy in the room, the power humming in the core, and the raw, violent power radiating from him. And she simply took it. She drew it all into herself. And then she pushed back, not with force, but with a profound, echoing silence. The effect was instantaneous. Marcus, in mid-lunge, cried out, a sound of agony and shock. His powerful wolf form wavered, dissolved like smoke, and collapsed back into the shape of a man, naked, powerless, and shivering on the cold floor. He was defeated. She didn't kill him because she was not like him. Her power was for control, not for cruelty. He stared at his hands, at his human skin, his mind unable to comprehend what had just happened. In that moment, the chamber doors burst open. Jack stood there, bloodied and breathing hard, his eyes blazing. He saw her standing untouched, and then he saw Marcus broken on the floor. His jaw dropped, and the entire army of outcasts behind him fell silent, their roars of battle fading into stunned, reverent awe. He had fought his way through hell to get to her. He had followed the sounds of the alarms, the scent of her righteous, his heart pounding with a terrifying fear that he would be too late. He'd burst through the final door, ready to face down a monster, ready to die to save her. Instead, he found a miracle. Serafina stood in the center of the room unharmed, a quiet, luminous power radiating from her. And at her feet was Marcus Thorne, no longer a powerful alpha heir, but a naked, shivering man, defeated. He was powerless. He was naked. He was beaten. And she had done it without a single scratch on her. What does true power look like? Is it the ability to destroy, or the strength to show mercy? In that instant, Jax knew the answer. His army of rogues flooded into the room behind him, their blood up, their weapons ready. They saw Marcus on the floor, and a low, hungry growl rippled through the crowd. They saw justice, and they wanted blood. Silas stepped forward, a brutal grin on his face. "Let us finish it, Alpha," he snarled. All eyes turned to Jack. They were his pack. They would follow his command. But he didn't give one. Instead, he looked at Serafina. He let her lead because he recognized her wisdom was the perfect balance to his strength. It was her fight, her victory, her call to make. She met his gaze, a silent conversation passing between them. Then, she turned to the crowd, her voice ringing with an authority that no one dared question. "No," she said. "There has been enough killing. The old ways, the ways of blood for blood, end tonight." She looked down at Marcus. "He won't be killed. He will be held. He will face a council of all bloodlines, rogues and Packerin alike, and he will answer for the crimes of Project Purity." A murmur went through the crowd, a mix of confusion and grudging respect. It was a new idea. Justice, not just vengeance. Without another word, she walked towards him, moving through the crowd of hardened killers, who parted for her as if she were tea. Itself. She stopped in front of him, her eyes searching his. He didn't know what to say. "You," he started, his voice rough. "You saved yourself." She gave him a small, tired smile. "We saved each other," she whispered. And as her hand found his, he knew his long, lonely war was finally over. Days later, the world felt new. The rogue encampment, once a place of suspicion and despair, was now a chaotic, bustling hub of hope. Wolves from a dozen shattered packs, outcasts, half-bloods. They were all there, drawn by the news of the Silver Crescent fall and the promise of something different. They were the broken, the discarded, the forgotten, and now they were a community. Her new community, her new home. She stood on a small hill overlooking the camp, watching the sun rise, the warmth on her skin, a gentle promise. She was no longer invisible. Here she was seen. She was respected. She was a leader. She felt his presence before she heard him approach. Jax came to stand beside. His familiar scent of leather and wildness, a comfort to her soul. He didn't speak for a long time, the two of them just watching the dawn paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. "It's a start," he said finally, his voice quiet. "It's more than a start," she replied, leaning her head against his shoulder. "It's a home." She felt his arm wrap around her, pulling her close. They had built this together, from the ashes of their scarred pasts. They were survivors. They were leaders. They were home. He turned her to face him, his golden eyes soft in the morning light. "My parents, they used to tell me stories about a world like this," he said, his voice thick with an emotion he no longer tried to hide. "A world where it didn't matter what blood you had, only what was in your heart. I thought it was just a fairy tale." He brushed a strand of her mousy brown hair from her face. "You made it real, Serafina." Her heart swelled. A feeling so full and blithe, she thought it might burst. The core emotional question of her life had been answered. She was not defined by her scars. She was defined by the love she had found and the future she was now building. "We made it real." She corrected him softly, and then she rose on her toes and kissed him. A kiss not of desperation or fear, but of peace and promise, and a love as steady and as sure as the rising sun. He watched her as she stood on the hill, a queen surveying her new chaotic kingdom. The sunlight caught in her hair, and for a moment he saw not the mousy brown dye, but the silvery blonde she was born with. He saw the strength she had forged from her pain, the grace she had found in her power. He had spent his life surrounded by ghosts, but now the world was overwhelmingly, breathtakingly alive. The sounds from the camp below, laughter, arguments, the clang of hammers, it wasn't the silence of the highway he was used to. It was the music of a living, breathing pack. His family. When he went to her, standing beside her, as the sun came up, a sense of peace settled over him for the first time in 10 years. The rage was gone. The cold need for vengeance had been replaced by a quiet, steady warmth that started in his chest and spread through his entire body. It was her. She had done that. She had healed a wound he thought was fatal. He told her about his parents' dream, the words catching in his throat, the confession of final release of the past. Her response, "We made it real," was the truest thing he had ever heard. As she kissed him, he knew his transformation was complete. He was no longer a rogue, no longer a ghost. He was an alpha, a partner, a mate. He pulled her closer, breathing in her scent, the scent that had once been a mystery and was now simply home. He had spent his life running from connections, believing they were a weakness. But this connection, this bond with her, was the source of his greatest strength. A new voice, a familiar, gruff one, called up from the bottom of the hill. "Alpha, Serafina, we need you." It was Silas, a look of urgent importance on his face. Jax looked at Serafina, a slow smile spreading across his lips. Their work was just beginning. There were councils to form, laws to write, a new world to build, and he wouldn't want to do it with anyone else. "Welcome home, Alpha," she murmured against his chest, a teasing light in her eyes. And as he took her hand, ready to face their new day together, he finally, truly. If you enjoyed listening this story, please hit the like button, share it with someone who'd love this, and subscribe to Nightbond Narratives and ring the bell so you don't miss what's coming next. Tell me in the comments below which part of the world you are watching from. Also, tell me which part of the story you like the most. Compilation of a video of an audiobook takes a lot of time and effort. So, if you see any ambiguity, please ignore. I hope you would appreciate my effort.